Hey everybody, it's Norm and Will, and welcome to Season 2 of Behind the Garage Door. We've stepped up a little bit, new set for Season 2, changed up a few things. First episode right out of the gate, a very special car with a guy that we're kind of close to, Mr. Hurley, and his 69 Camaro. So we're going to head downstairs into the showroom and meet up with Steve. And we've made it all the way down to the beautiful showroom here at Stingray Chevrolet. Steve Hurley.
Morning, Norm.
How you doing?
How are you? Doing great.
Thank you very much for taking the time to show one of the beautiful cars in your collection, the 1969 Camaro. Now, when you and I met a long time ago, many moons ago.
Been a while.
Shortly after that, you actually purchased this car.
Yes.
And I always kind of clown you a little bit because when you bought this car, it was incredibly nice. And the first thing you did was tear it apart.
It looked just about like it does now,
yeah.
but a car that looks this fantastic. This car nearly took my breath away, and that's an overused cliche, but I had never seen a 1969 or any first-gen Camaro that looked like this. Mm-hmm. So what I have to do, obviously I walked around it, looked at the car, immediately got on the ground and started looking underneath it. Liked what I saw, but the subframe turned out to be original and had some pitting in it. And I thought, how can you have a car this perfect and have some pitting from old rust being an original subframe? Of course, I got the backstory later that the restoration was a many year process. And at the end, as it typically happens, the owner is just like, let's just please get it done. And they had powder coated the original frame, and this was a barn find.
Okay.
And this actually has only been done, this car has only been done once since it was brand new, as far as a build. So the car was a barn find, had a lot of rust. And so when I got the car, I pulled out the subframe, put in a brand new subframe, put everything back together. And of course, the engine idled really smooth, and we tore the engine apart because I was really suspicious about the engine. Turns out it didn't have the right cam, and it didn't have a forged crank. A 350 horse 396 has a forged crank. That's one thing that differentiates it from the 325 horse. So we put in the correct forged crank, put in the correct grind cam, put the subframe in, put it all back together. The drive shaft did not have the orange and the white stripes denoting the 396 and the 4-speed. So little details like that. There are many of those details in the car.
Before you go too much further into the rest of the stuff you had to do, let's explain to the people exactly what this car is. This is a very rare car, and it's color, it's what it was ordered with, and everything else. So kind of give us the details about what this car is.
It is a Cortez Silver 1969 Camaro SS. It's a 396, and as I mentioned, it's 350 horsepower. They made about 13,000 plus 396 engines in 1969, and about half of them were the 325 horse, and about 4,000 of them, roughly, were the 375 horse L78 solid lifter motor. Well, the 350 horse, they only made 2,018 of these engines. And what's special about the 350 horse, it's the most horsepower you could get and have air conditioning. So this is a highly optioned SS Camaro with factory air, power steering, power brakes, the deluxe interior, I call it the Ice Cube Tray SS hood, along with the sport wheels and the fold-down rear seat, which again is another very rare option, only about 4,400 ever made. Anytime you see a 69 Camaro, and anybody over the past several decades, you see that 396 on the fender, it's a car worth saving. Well, the fold-down seat was just an option that you could check a box out of 243,000 Camaros made in '69, and it could have been on a 6-cylinder Camaro, it could have been on a 307 engine Camaro, or it could be on a high-performance Camaro. So most of the fold-down rear seat cars are long gone because they weren't worth saving over the years. But if you found a Z28 or an SS big block car, those cars tended to be preserved. Well, this just happened to be one of the cars that should be preserved, and it had the fold-down rear seat, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense.
So I bet there aren't more than couple of hundred in existence. It's very rare.
Very rare to have all the AC big block, high horsepower big block, fold-down rear seat, rosewood steering wheel?
Rosewood tilt steering wheel, about 2% of the cars have that option.
So basically, this car in 1969 was ordered in a way that a modern car today, the only thing it really doesn't have is cruise.
Yes, it doesn't have cruise, doesn't have power windows, but whoever ordered this car wanted the performance, but they wanted the 4-speed, but they wanted the comfort. They wanted the nice air conditioning, the power steering, power brakes, all the nice options, which is why this car was really preserved. Even though it was a barn find, it was a pretty rusty car when they found it.
Okay, Steve, so we talked a little bit about, now that we know what the car is,
Right.
we talked a little bit about what you did after you bought it. Pulled the engine, I'm assuming you pulled the whole doghouse off, you pulled the subframe out, redid all that stuff, replaced the cam, replaced the crank to make the whole engine correct. What are some of the other things that you had to do to make this car as perfect as it is now?
Well, again, the car was so nice, we wanted it to be as correct as we could. We didn't actually pull the whole front end sheet metal off the car, but there were a few things that weren't quite right. One being the brake booster. It's a Delco Moraine brake booster. One, the finish wasn't really the way I liked it and the way I remembered that they were when I was a little kid when these cars were out. But the letters, the words Delco Moraine are supposed to be upside down on the brake booster, which sounds kind of like a minor thing, but that's something that people look for. So we actually got the correct booster, had it finished with a correct finish, and replaced that. The fuel cap, I found out that the lettering where it says vented, and I don't remember the other lettering, but it was backwards on the cap for the fuel. But so we had to actually replace that. So the way that this came about, a guy named Ron, who at the time owned a Camaro ZL1, a real ZL1, one of the 69s, who's a dealership friend of mine, and we went over the car, and I had a yellow notepad. I actually had a legal pad, and I was making about 20 notes of all the things that were not correct, because this guy was a Camaro restorer also. And so I just felt the car was so special that why not make everything that we can as correct as we can. That's why I mentioned the stripes on the drive shaft, making it so the subframe had no pitting, and so forth. But the detail of the car is so amazing, and I'll give you an example just while we're standing here. When they built these cars, they painted this hockey stripe on. So this is painted on the fender. But when they assembled the interior, at that time the doors were off, and it didn't coincide with when they painted the stripe. So once they finished putting the interior in, they put the doors back on the car on the line, and this stripe is actually a decal, it's tape. And that's how correct this restoration is. This is paint and this is tape.
And that's how they did it originally in '69?
That's how they did. I actually spoke to a guy named Dean, who is a local Camaro fanatic himself, and when I explained that, he goes, I always wondered why my car was like that. I thought somebody did that to it. And he had original paint on his car. And so he realized at that time that was correct because his was done that way.
Well, I bet that made him
kind of
extra
exciting.
happy.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
But another thing that's very special about this car that you look for on any restoration, and this car is definitely restored far beyond what it would have looked like when it was brand new. Yes, they were nice. Yes, they were brand new. But the way these cars were assembled, the gapping wasn't perfect. Mm-hmm. They're building them, hundreds and hundreds every week at the factory. And so when this car was restored, there was careful attention paid to the gaps on all the shutting surfaces, like the hood, like the doors, for example. And the doors are kind of interesting because you'll notice in the design, you have this point right here in the door and the fender. But what that does, it makes it to where when you open the door, that point has to go somewhere. And when you open this, Norm, you couldn't even put a piece of paper in there. It's so close.
So close.
But doesn't ever hit. And the reason for that is he had to move it out enough for this to have somewhere to go, but to be able to still close the door. And so the shut lines and the gaps on this car are just phenomenal. It's the best I've ever seen on a Camaro.
So Steve, we know that anybody that is a fan of Camaros, especially the first-gen Camaros, is going to appreciate seeing this car and everything that you've done to it. I always thought it was really cool because you've owned this car twice.
Yes.
You sold it about eight-ish years ago.
Correct.
And I thought it was really cool, the fact that on your phone and on your computer in your office, your wallpaper for the last 8 years has been this car.
Right.
Even when you didn't own it.
Correct.
So tell me why you wanted this car back so bad.
Well, I bought the car because I was just so blown away at how nice it was. And actually, even to this day, the person that did this car is doing a very, very special Z28 for me that we'll have to talk about in the future. But I knew the car was very special. But at the time, it was the early years of the dealership, and I had a lot of money tied up in a lot of cars. And you buy quite a few, and then you sell them, and then you buy a few more. But when I sold this car, I sold it to a guy I became friends with. He ended up buying this car and 2 others from me. And so I just knew I'd have this car back one day. I just really knew I would buy this car back one day. It's the first real high-end special muscle car that I bought for the dealership to put on display and to help market what Stingray is all about. We're about performance. We're about preserving the history of performance in Chevrolet. And it just really goes along with what our dealership is all about. And we're a destination. We're out on I-4 in Plant City, and we pull people in and draw people in from pretty far out. And you never know what you're going to see at Stingray Chevrolet. And since this car, which really started it all, we've probably sold 200 plus really nice classic cars over the past 10 years. So it was about 8.5 years, and I did buy the car back, and I don't want to let it go next time. So I think I'm going to keep it this time. It's a very special car, particularly knowing who had the car done the first time is a friend of mine, and the person that did the car is also a friend of mine, and he's doing, as I mentioned, a very special Z28 for me.
Yeah.
So this car is very important to me.
All right, Steve, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and sharing with us that beautiful 69 SS 396 Camaro. Now, one of the things that we didn't touch on while we were talking to Steve is exactly how far this car was torn down before the restoration started. Now, here's what it looks like now. And here's what they started with. Make sure you leave a comment below, and make sure you check out all of our other social media platforms. All the links are below as well. And make sure you're back here every Thursday for another episode of Behind the Garage Door.
Stingray Chevrolet, relax, enjoy the difference.